Hi students, this is Satyabama, your biology teacher. It's a continuation of your last class. We learned in the last class about human female reproductive system structure alone. I think you could remember that in human female reproductive system, there are pairs of ovaries, oviduct and a uterus, cervix and vagina. Now, in this class, we are going to discuss about the structure of ovary. See here I have shown you the ovary structure. It secretes female gametes. What is special about it? It secretes female gametes and steroid hormones. What is the size of this ovary? The length is 2 to 4 centimeter and width is 1.5 centimeter and thickness is 1 centimeter. It is differentiated into 4 parts. I have mentioned here, you see. One is germinal epithelium, second is tunica albuginea, third is cortex and last one is medulla. Where it is located in this structure? You see, germinal epithelium is nothing but surface epithelium. It is the outermost layer which covers the ovary, which is made up of what? Which is made up of simple squamous and cuboidal cells. Your germinal epithelium or surface epithelium of ovary is made up of simple squamous and cuboidal cells. What is the role of this? This germinal epithelium forms the oogonia in the fetus. Let me explain about the oogenesis, then you will come to understand the role of this germinal epithelium. Right. What is next? Here I have mentioned tunica albuginea. What is tunica albuginea? Where did I mention here the diagram? You see, tunica albuginea of ovary. Inner side of your germinal epithelium, tunica albuginea, it is a poorly developed layer. Not like our germinal epithelium, it's a poorly developed layer. It is made up of dense connective tissue. Where it is below the germinal epithelium and above the cortex. As the position states, tunica albuginea is located below the germinal epithelium and above the cortex. Of course, where is the cortex? The next part is cortex. It is a wider area. It is the wider area. Complete, you see, primary follicles, secondary follicles, primordial follicles, all these I mentioned, right? That is nothing but cortex. In this cortical region only all these follicles with oocytes are there. Right. So, it is the cortex, a wider area with a large number of primary follicles with a few blood vessels around. Few blood vessels. What about the last one? Medulla. Medulla is the center part, innermost part of the ovary. And it is made up of less dense connective tissue, richly supplied with blood vessels and nervous tissue. And got it? Your cortex, this cortical region and the center medullary region together called as stroma. Right? Within the ovary, we have only 4 major parts. One is germinal epithelium, second is tunica albuginea, third is cortex and fourth one is medulla. Cortex and medulla are together known as stroma. Medulla is the innermost region. Medulla is the innermost region. Next to medulla we have a wider cortical region and next to cortex we have a poorly developed tunica albuginea and outermost layer is nothing but germinal epithelium. Or what did I say? Surface epithelium, which I marked here. What is special about this surface or germinal epithelium? This germinal epithelium only forms the oogonia in the fetus stage. Are you clear about the structure of the ovary? Now, about the oogenesis. One more structure let me show. You can understand little bit easier. You see the color picture I have mentioned here. This blood vessels, red color blood vessels and bluish color nerve cells, nervous tissues I have mentioned. That is the medullary region, and where primordial follicles, primary, secondary follicle, tertiary follicles and so on I mentioned, that is the cortex region, you could understand. And here outermost layer line alone is there, that is nothing but your germinal epithelium. This germinal epithelium of the ovary gives rise to oogonia. What is oogonia? Ovum mother cell. Oogonia is nothing but ovum mother cell. Unlike spermatogenesis, in oogenesis, this oogonia develops from the fetal stage itself. It starts to develop from the fetal stage. Whereas in spermatogenesis, the sperm development begins in the human male only after the puberty. Whereas in human female, right from the female baby in the stage of fetus in the mother's womb itself, this oogenesis begins. Can you get my point? As the fetus grows, what happens? Number of oogonias also will be increasing. In the last slide itself, I mentioned the outer germinal epithelium is responsible for the formation of oogonia. Oogonia is nothing but ovum mother cell. Several oogonias will be formed, nearly lakhs. Initially, the first month of the fetal stage, by the time nearly 60,000, 1,700 oogonial cells. In the second month of the female fetal stage, 60,000 will be. In such a way, it keeps increasing. Germinal epithelium starts producing several oogonia or ovum mother cells. By the time of birth, by the time of the female birth of the female baby from the mother's womb, the ovary of the female baby at the time of birth contains nearly 2 million oogonia. Got it? Nearly contains 2 million oogonia. All these are possible due to this mitotic and followed by meiotic division. Mitosis, multiplication division, and what happens, all these primary follicles will be produced. Before that, primary follicles, oocyte, primary oocytes will be produced, as I said. This oocyte is covered by a single layer, granulosa cell. This granulosa cell is also produced from the germinal epithelium. So, primary oocyte with granulosa is known as primordial follicle or primary follicle, just developed one. It is the initial one, and this one is the early primary follicle. This primordial follicle is otherwise called the early primary follicle, and it is a matured primary follicle. Got it? First, primary follicles will be. Are you clear? At the time of the birth of the female baby, the baby born with primary follicles. Got it? With primary, nearly 60,000 to 80,000 primary follicles. 60,000 to 80,000. Earlier I said nearly 2 million. What happened? How come it can reduced? It has reduced reduced drastically due to the degeneration. Many follicles will be degenerated, and the rest is only 60,000 to 80,000 primary follicles. You see, in the center, in the primary follicles, outer pinkish color layer is there, but in the center, one black color dot like structure, that is nothing but primary oocyte. The primary oocyte is surrounded by a layer of cells called granulosa. So, primary follicle is nothing but granulosa plus primary oocyte. Got it? See, I have shown here another arrow mark. Up to this, with this primary follicle, as I said, the baby is born. Got it? Okay. With this meiotic of prophase 1 will be arrested. You see, here mitosis, all these this formation of primary follicles are possible only due to the mitosis and meiosis. In meiosis, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, 4 phases are there. Prophase 1, up to prophase 1 will be over. Prophase 2, metaphase 1 will not be initiated. With that, the meiosis 1 will be arrested. With that, the baby is born. So, are you clear? At the time of the birth of the baby, in baby's ovaries, primary follicles are there. Nearly 60,000 to 80,000 primary follicles are there. What is primary follicle? It is a primary follicle is nothing but primary oocyte plus granulosa. This granulosa, what is granulosa? It is a cell. From where it is formed? From the germinal epithelium, outer layer. As I said earlier, right? Germinal epithelium. Are you clear now? With that, the baby is born. Okay. Now, from the birth to till the puberty, there is no changes, no more development. But this 60,000 to 80,000 primary follicles started degenerating instead of secreting new thing. What happens? Drastically will be reduced. Nearly 450 follicles will be there by the time of puberty. Got it? After puberty, what happens? This primary follicles gets converted into secondary follicles. You see, it gets converted into secondary follicle. Okay, you can raise one question. What is the difference between primary follicle and secondary follicle? Both are looking similar. But you see here some bluish color layer I have mentioned here, secondary follicle. Here it is surrounded by, apart from the granulosa, apart from the pinkish color layer called granulosa, here theca interna and theca externa, 2 more layers are added. They are fibrous layers. Outer fibrous theca externa, inner cellular theca interna. right? The granulosa layer becomes stratified. What happens? Okay, this is secondary follicle. At the time, what happens? This granulosa started secreting a fluid. This granulosa, outer granulosa, started secreting a fluid. This, what happens? It creates a cavity. It started secreting a fluid. It creates a cavity. See this blue color, the cavity you could see here, and it is increased, the cavity is increasing in size. So how come the cavity is possible? The granulosa, pink color cells called granulosa started secreting a fluid. This fluid creates a cavity. What is the name of the cavity? The name of the cavity is antrum. What is the name of the cavity? Antrum. This antrum, this cavity is filled with a fluid. What fluid? From where it has come? It has come from the granulosa. What is the name of the fluid? It is nothing but liquor folliculi. What is it? Liquor. Liquor. Liquor folliculi. Are you clear? This what happens? This fluid just pushes this oocyte aside. Can you observe? See here, primary follicle and in secondary follicle and all oocytes, primary oocytes are in the center position. You see here, it is going to push us your oocyte aside. Got it? Then now this primary structure is nothing but tertiary follicle. Are you clear? One changes. In the primary follicle, only granulosa with the primary oocyte. With that, the baby born. This primary follicle, after the birth, after the puberty only, it started increasing the size as well as it started improving with a layer called theca externa and theca interna. What is the difference between primary follicle and secondary follicle? Theca externa and interna are absent in primary follicle. That is the only difference. And what happens? From the secondary follicle, tertiary follicle will be formed. What is the difference between these two? Here, granulosa cell starts to produce a fluid called liquor folliculi. This liquor folliculi is filled in the cavity called antrum. So, this cavity is missing in this secondary and primary follicle. These are the major differences between primary, secondary and tertiary follicles. What is special in the tertiary follicle? Again, in the tertiary follicle, again a non-cellular thick glycoprotein rich layer occur between the oocyte and the corona radiata, that is called Zona Pellucida. Again, one more layer will be covered, that is nothing but Zona Pellucida. The Zona Pellucida you can see in this here, outer layer, Zona Pellucida. In the cavity are called antrum. The cavity, blue color cavity is called antrum. Cavity is filled with liquor folliculi. You see here we have a secondary oocyte. Up to this I said primary oocyte. Then what happens? Your meiosis 1, again whatever gets arrested after at the time of birth will be initiated after puberty. As a result only all these changes are possible. So what happens at the end? This primary oocyte gets converted into secondary oocyte. So what is there in this kind of cell? You see this is a mature Graafian follicle. It is a mature Graafian follicle. So tertiary follicle gets converted into a mature Graafian follicle. How come it is possible? All these changes are happening due to the influence of what? Because of the hormone. Follicle are there. Can you guess the name of the hormone? Yes, of course, your guess is right. Follicular stimulating hormone. In the spermatogenesis itself, hormonal control I said FSH and LH. What is FSH? Follicular stimulating hormone. What is LH? Luteinizing hormone. Both these FSH and LH are produced by whom? Pituitary, under the influence of hypothalamus. Good. Where you have remembered. So this under the influence of this follicular stimulating hormone only, your Graafian follicle will be matured. So primary follicle, secondary follicle, tertiary follicle will become a mature Graafian follicle. So tell me now, at the time of the birth in the newborn baby's ovary, what will be there? Primary follicle will be there. Primary follicle is nothing but primary oocyte plus granulosa cell. Granulosa cell is formed from whom? From the germinal epithelium. This primary follicle gets converted into secondary follicle after the puberty of a female child. This secondary follicles gets converted into tertiary follicle with antrum, and then because of this antrum only it pushes the secondary oocyte into a side. So by this time itself, in the tertiary follicle itself, what happens? This primary oocyte gets converted into secondary oocyte. Your matured Graafian follicle now contains secondary oocyte. What is this? You see here, this structure. Something is coming out from the ovary, right? Is nothing but this structure is nothing but your mature Graafian follicle. This mature Graafian follicle ruptures and releases this secondary oocyte alone. Got it? So release up to this secondary oocyte is formed, right? This we call as a ovum or egg cell. This ovum will be released from the ovary by the rupturing of this mature Graafian follicle. Are you clear? This process is known as ovulation. This process is known as ovulation. One more information I have to add here, children, in the Graafian follicle. I said the maturation of Graafian follicle is because of the hormone called follicular stimulating hormone. At the same time, this granulosa cells of this Graafian follicle started secreting estrogen hormone. You could remember in your earlier classes you would have learnt estrogen, progesterone, female sex hormone, right? This estrogen, it is a female sex hormone which is not only maintaining the female sex characters but also it prepares the inner lining of the genital tract for receiving the ovum, right? To receive the ovum. Suppose if the estrogen level is more, what happens? It activates the anterior pituitary to secrete another hormone called LH. So how come luteinizing hormone is produced? Estrogen. If the estrogen content is more, automatically it induces the pituitary to release the LH hormone. Okay. Now tell me, from the Graafian follicle, mature Graafian follicle, this ovum in the form of secondary oocyte ruptures and comes out. What happens to the rest? What happens to the rest? Now it has become like this. What is this? This is nothing but corpus luteum. Corpus luteum. You know, by the release of this ovum, secondary oocyte, this Graafian follicle will become empty. Am I right? Will become empty. What will be there? Without a secondary oocyte, only full of blood clot will be there. Right, blood clot will be there. Will develop a yellow color carotenoid pigment. The color itself it's changed, you see. Here up to this I have shown you pink color granulosa cells and all, but here it is light yellow color and it has become full yellowish color due to the production of carotene pigment, yellow pigment, right? Or lutein we call. Pigment name is lutein, lutein, which gets converted into lutein cells. It converts the ruptured follicle into the yellow body called corpus luteum. So what is the structure? This is known as corpus luteum. This corpus luteum again acts as a temporary endocrine gland and secretes the female hormone called progesterone. Are you clear, my dears? See, your estrogen is produced by the Graafian follicle, granulosa cells of Graafian follicle. Progesterone is produced by the corpus luteum. Then corpus luteum to corpus albigans. This corpus luteum will be fully developed. This is also corpus luteum, and from this it is completely matured corpus luteum. Then what happens? This corpus luteum again will become corpus albigans. It stops their activity. Corpus luteum stops their activity and loses the yellowish color and starts to degenerate. And by the time it looks like a somewhat whitish color, you see, this is nothing but corpus albigans. See, I have mentioned, given, I have labeled even corpus luteum. This is corpus luteum and corpus albigans. I think it is clear to you, children. Primary follicle to secondary follicle to tertiary follicle, and mature Graafian follicle. And from the Graafian follicle, ovulation takes place. After ovulation, with the help of this LH, what happens? Corpus luteum is produced. Corpus luteum gets converted into corpus albigans. So, cycle gets completed. Got it? Now, you see, what did I say? That the same thing I have mentioned the form of oogenesis. Oogenesis I already have explained within the ovary itself. You see, as I mentioned, you see, oogonia, several oogonias are produced in the fetal stage, and the primary oocyte will be there with 2n only. The mitosis and meiosis will be there, and meiosis prophase up to prophase it gets stopped. So before birth. This is nothing but before birth. So before birth the follicles develop into oogonia. Oogonia grow into a primary oocyte which are surrounded by the primary follicle. Right. You see here I have mentioned here after follicle. The same structure whatever I explained. After birth. After birth, right from adolescence to menopause. Adolescence in the sense after puberty. Menarche to menopause we could say. Menarche to menopause. Here again the primary oocyte. Let me expand this primary oocyte, and again meiosis 1 up to prophase 1 was over, right, before birth. Then what happens, the meiosis 1 will be completed. By the time secondary oocyte will be produced. So secondary oocyte where it is present, which is present in the tertiary follicle. So right, along with the tertiary secondary oocyte, a small cell will be formed, that is nothing but polar body. So this, what is the role of this polar body? As it is very small in size, in human being it is said that it will be degenerated. The polar body will be degenerated. When will be formed? By the time of formation of secondary oocyte from the primary oocyte. This secondary oocyte is present in the Graafian follicle. This secondary oocyte only, it comes out from the ovary in through ovulation process. Got it? You see the next one. This is secondary oocyte. 1 minute. This secondary oocyte, after ovulation it comes out. If it is not fertilized, if the sperm is not there in the oviduct or fallopian tube, what happens? Will die. What happens? Will live for 1 day and it dies. And if it is fertilization takes place, sperm enters into the ovum, and what happens by the time meiosis 2, meiosis 1 alone gets over. Now only meiosis 2 will takes place. By the time also another polar body, this is a second polar body, already here one polar body produced and degenerates. At the same way here second polar body will be produced, it also degenerates. As a result of the second meiosis, zygote will be produced because the fertilization takes place. You can have a very good doubt here. I said pair of ovary, pair of oviduct, but here I have mentioned only one ovum. What about the another ovary? From one single ovary, one ovum will be released. What will happen to the another ovary? Alternatively they are producing within 25 days. One ovarian follicle matures alternatively by the 2 ovaries within 28 days. For 1 month from first ovary started releasing ovum. In the second month, the next 2 ovaries started releasing ovum. From menarche to menopause it extends. You see antrum, the structure, let me maximize. You see, and I have shown you right earlier in the picture antrum, and this is antrum, this cavity, and the fluid which is filled liquor. I said I suppose this is ovulation process. Before ovulation, meiosis 1 will be completed. After ovulation, what happens? Corpus luteum and corpus albigans will be formed. Right. The same only schematic representation I have mentioned before, during the fetal life and during the birth and after puberty, after birth, after puberty, what happens? The same. You can take down this as a notes, will be a good explanation for you. Hormonal control, as I mentioned, it's quite easy. Hypothalamus, master of master gland. This hypothalamus is releasing GnRH, that is nothing but gonadotropin releasing hormone, and this GnRH induces the pituitary gland. It induces the pituitary gland, master gland, to release the hormones called FSH and LH. As I said earlier, this FSH induces the Graafian follicle maturation. Both FSH and LH acts on the ovary, which are secreted by the pituitary gland. And as a result, what happens? Graafian follicle will be matured and ova will be released, and estrogen will be produced, and progesterone will be produced by the corpus albigans and corpus luteum. Are you clear? In this class, we have learnt the structure of the ovary, internal structure of the ovary. As I said, only 4 layers are there. What are the 4 layers? One is outermost germinal epithelium, Tunica Albuginea, cortex and medulla, all these. The important role of the germinal epithelium is formation of oogonia. And I have explained all these structures of the internal structure of the ovary. What is their primary follicle to, how come from primary follicle to corpus albigan formation, primary follicle, secondary follicle, tertiary follicle, Graafian follicle, ovulation, after ovulation corpus luteum, then corpus albigans, then cycle stops. There, got it? If any doubt, you ask me through WhatsApp and mail, children. Along with this, let me add some notes also, can take down through in the classwork. And in the next class, we'll learn about the menopause, right? A menstrual cycle. Thank you, students.